It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Speeding into a confrontation which could question her future. Suella Braverman defiant after being accused of breaking ministerial rules.
I got a speeding ticket, I paid the fine, I took the points. In my view, nothing untoward has happened. Thank you.
The record migration figures which could put the brakes on Suella Braverman, a hardline Home Secretary, as hundreds of thousands arrive. Also tonight, 16 years after her disappearance, police searching for the truth about Madeleine McCann prepare to search a remote reservoir on the Algarve.
Yes.
4 murders, 1 man accused, the suspect in the student killings that shook America, facing the charges in court. We hear the lack of support for the survivors of terror, from the Manchester attack to the fight back on London Bridge. A hate crime on the football pitch, the racist abuse suffered by one of the world's best players. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. Suella Braverman was probably expecting the controversy to hit later this week, when on Thursday the Home Secretary is likely to face questions over an unprecedented rise in migration into the UK. The challenge, though, has come days earlier, with Ms Braverman accused of asking civil servants to help her handle a speeding fine. She said she'd done nothing wrong. The Prime Minister said he'd spoken to the government's ethics advisor. A civil service union said she'd clearly broken the ministerial code. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has this report.
Caught on camera, not for the first time. The Home Secretary arriving at a London charity this morning. Found to be speeding last summer, Suella Braverman is accused of asking civil servants to help arrange a private speed awareness course.
I was speeding, I regret that. I paid the fine and I took the points. But we're focused now on delivering for the British people and working for them.
Did you ask civil servants to put you on a one-on-one speeding course?
In relation to the process, I'm focused on delivering for the British people, do my job as Home Secretary. What I will say is that, in my view, I'm confident that nothing untoward has happened.
Are you going to resign, Home Secretary?
Trying to focus on the day job, it's ultimately for the Prime Minister to decide whether his ethics advisor opens an investigation into the Home Secretary. That would likely centre on this part of the government rulebook that states ministers should uphold the political impartiality of the civil service.
I've always been clear that where issues like this are raised, they should be dealt with properly and they should be dealt with professionally. Since I've returned from the G7, I have been receiving information on the issues raised. I have met with both the independent advisor and the Home Secretary. I've asked for further information and I'll update on the appropriate course of action in due course.
At the Home Office, this row comes at a tense time, with new migration data this week set to show another big rise.
The context of this speeding story is arguably as important as the allegations. Suella Braverman has been pushing for tougher measures to curb migration, with some suggestions running into resistance from other members of the Cabinet. She's also ruffled feathers after giving a speech at a right-wing conference last week that some felt sounded a little too much like a leadership pitch.
In the Commons, Labour accusing the Prime Minister of being in hock to his party and unable to act.
The Prime Minister is clearly too weak to sort this out. Well, if the Home Secretary cannot get a grip of her own rule-breaking behaviour, how can she get a grip on anything else?
The Home Secretary accusing Labour of playing politics.
They want to talk about this because it distracts. It distracts from the fact that they voted against tougher sentences for paedophiles and murderers. They want us to ignore the fact that Labour MPs would rather campaign to stop the deportation of foreign criminals than back our Rwanda scheme.
We welcome you unless you come on a boat.
Often polarising, some allies of the Home Secretary do claim the speeding story is an attempt to discredit her over migration. It's now for Rishi Sunak to decide how to proceed, a minister with friends and foes making the way forward particularly fraught. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, the migration figures due later this week are likely to be far from the much-repeated promise to reduce numbers to the tens of thousands. There appears to be tension at the top of government over whether to prioritise making coming to the UK harder over economic growth. Our business and economics correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, has this assessment of what to expect.
The country may have voted to leave the European Union, but migration to Britain is on the verge of hitting a record high. Over the past year, the country has opened its doors to people from Ukraine and Hong Kong. A smaller number of migrants have also crossed the Channel on small boats. But it's also businesses that are bringing people over using the new skilled visa route to help plug crippling staff shortages. And since the beginning of 2021, when the government introduced its new post-Brexit migration system, you can see the number of people entering Britain on skilled visas has soared, just as businesses started struggling with post-lockdown staff shortages. And if we dive deeper into the data, we can see it's the healthcare and IT industries that are relying most heavily on overseas skilled workers. Businesses in these sectors are bringing over nurses, care workers, pharmacists and software developers. These are industries with long-standing labour shortages. And drilling into the occupations, we can see that nurses and care workers dominate the skilled visa route. But chefs, accountants and management consultants are also coming over in large numbers. The biggest proportional increases are being recorded in sectors that form the country's food supply chain. Agriculture and accommodation and food services have recorded enormous leaps in migrants, with bakers, butchers and farmers all entering Britain on skilled visas. Businesses in the construction sector are also using the scheme to offset the loss of European workers who have been leaving in recent years. And across the workforce, these Europeans are being replaced by workers from other parts of the world. And as you can see here, it's predominantly Indians that are making up the shortfall, with more than 100,000 coming to Britain on skilled visas over the past few years. They're being joined by a growing number of workers from Philippines, Nigeria and the US. So this is the changing face of migrant Britain. And while the government talks tough on immigration, the country's post-Brexit migration policy is actually more liberal than ever.
Well, our political correspondent Joe Pike is in Downing Street tonight. Joe, some embarrassment then for Suella Braverman over speeding fines, but that may be dwarfed by being a hardline Home Secretary presiding over record migration figures.
It's a very good point, and Gurpreet touched on one fascinating paradox there. Here is another for you. Even though, of course, those here at number 10 and in the Home Office would rather avoid headlines about record migration figures later this week, they actually could, ironically, help Suella Braverman make the case for tougher measures to try and bring those numbers down. And she's not had much success in persuading Cabinet colleagues of the advantages of some of these measures. Certainly Jeremy Hunt said not to be keen on it because of the importance of some international workers to some sections of the economy. The Health Secretary, we're told, not keen either because of the importance of international workers to the NHS workforce. And also, we're told, the Education Secretary, presumably because of the importance of international students to the financing of universities. One thing that could damage, I suppose, Suella Braverman's case is this whole speeding row, because as a former advocate, it doesn't necessarily show her a judgment in a particularly good light. Ultimately, it's the judgment of the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak as to whether there is an investigation, and he is the judge as to whether a ministerial code breach has taken place. One thing, though, we learnt from the Dominic Raab row and the final slow stages of that, Anna, is that when it comes to decision-making, often Rishi Sunak is, ironically in this case, far from speedy.
Joe, thank you. For nearly 3 years, German police have suspected that a convicted child sex offender, Christian B, was responsible for the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Tomorrow, a search will begin, requested by them, of a reservoir around 30 miles away from where Madeleine went missing in Praia de Luge on the Algarve. Sky's Ashna Hurinag reports.
It's been 16 years of no answers, no closer to finding this little girl. But now a fresh search, concentrated on this remote reservoir. The Irish Dam is just 30 miles from where Madeleine McCann was taken from her bed in Praia de Luge. The main suspect, convicted sex offender Christian B, allegedly called this area his paradise. He is currently serving a sentence for raping a woman in the region from where Madeleine went missing. He denies any involvement in the 3-year-old's disappearance, saying he'd been staying in his camper van that night. The dam has been searched before as part of a private investigation in 2008. Now Portuguese and German authorities will spend the next 2 days scanning the water and surrounding woodland. Scotland Yard detectives are also there. Some approach with cautious optimism.
I think what's significant is that this search is being led by the German police. The German police are generally cautious by nature, but they've been absolutely adamant that they have the right person in custody and that they know what happened to Madeleine. And that's an unusual situation. So that makes me hopeful.
The case has haunted the world and decimated the world of her family. Earlier this month, they marked what would have been Madeleine's 20th birthday and reaffirmed their promise to never give up on finding her. Ashna Haranag, Sky News.
So Keir Starmer claimed today that the NHS wouldn't survive another 5 years under the Conservatives as he set out an ambitious but ambiguously costed plan to improve it. There would be new targets for ambulance response times, cancer diagnosis and thousands of new staff. Our political correspondent Liz Bates reports.
Keir Starmer.
It was all smiles and confidence today after Labour stepped up its game at the local elections. Sir Keir Starmer unveiling new plans for the NHS alongside some more familiar warnings about its future.
I don't think the NHS survives 5 more years of Tory government. And people say, oh, well, we've heard this before. The Labour Party is always saying it's time to save the NHS. But I say, look squarely in the eyes of the people who work in the NHS, who serve the NHS, and ask them.
Centre stage, ambitious new targets and a new focus on prevention, early diagnosis and technology. What was missing, though, how much it will all cost.
How do you expect the public to trust you with the public finances if you're not prepared to say quite straightforwardly, these are our plans, this is how much they will cost, and this is how we will pay for them?
This challenge you put to me that we've not said where the money's coming from is just wrong. Actually, are we going to have the biggest increase in training for the NHS that it's ever had in its history? Yes. Are we going to pay for that by abolishing the non-dom tax status? Yes. So what we've been careful to do is to say where we're making changes, what the change will be and how we will pay for it.
Labour's list of all the things that they would do to improve the NHS is a very long one. There is no shortage of ideas. But what about patients? Do they believe that the party can deliver on all of these promises?
Keir Starmer's track record of making pledges and then reneging on them is something he needs to address, I think.
I don't think it's in good hands under anybody because I honestly don't think they know what's going on at the sharp end.
Some people saying you need more money, but the point is, do we have enough people who actually want to work in the health system? You know, it's the thing.
Some reservations as well from a leading health think tank.
The commitments around heart disease and cancer are reflecting a realistic 10-year plan to improve. But Keir's also committed to restoring NHS waiting time standards within 5 years. Those standards haven't been met since 2015. This isn't just a backlog caused by the pandemic. This is a long-term challenge around the performance of the NHS. And I do think 5 years, whilst it's right to be ambitious, it's probably not deliverable.
Thank you.
Today was Labour trying to convince voters it is ready for government, part of a journey they hope will end at Downing Street. Liz Bates, Sky News, Essex.
Well, our health correspondent Ashish Joshi is with me, so some big promises there, but the data would suggest that Labour has quite a mountain to climb, quite apart from how to pay for all of this.
What Keir Starmer has done is looked at the key areas that concern patients and health workers and us as the public. And when we've been reporting on the winter crisis in the NHS, what really worries us? We worry about ambulance times, we worry about the elective waiting list, we worry about not being able to see our GP. So these are the areas he says he wants to tackle. He wants to reform the NHS, but you're right, he doesn't answer the question about money and budget. What he does say is, we'll make that money available, we'll show you our spending plans closer to the election. But then, and the caveat is, we're not going to spend the sort of money that Labour governments have spent on the NHS in the past. It's also about efficiencies and investing in technology. But all of that investment needs money. Let's look at some of the concerns patients have had. Let's look at A&E waiting times. He's made this a big pledge. Look, in 2010, the percentage was about 3%, and then it's grown all the way through, year after year after year, except that dip there, and we know why that was in January 2020 when patients weren't going to hospital because of the pandemic. And even then, the peak above 30% in 2023, and it's only just climbing down. Even now, we're still seeing 25.4% of patients waiting more than 4 hours in A&E. He says that's unacceptable, and he wants to make that one of his key priorities. How is he going to do it? Let's look at the sort of money that previous Labour administrations have spent. You see, in the early days when they came to power, 1997, they swept to power on the back of making the NHS one of their key priorities during their election campaign manifesto. They spent money on it all the way through to 2009, 10, and then the coalition. And look at the sharp fall in the percentage of money that was being spent on the NHS by the coalition government and then by the Conservatives. And then 2010, again, it's a negative spend because, 2020, a negative spend because of the pandemic. And now the planned spend on the NHS for 2024 is still much lower than any of those Labour years. So he's got some very difficult questions to answer. He talks about efficiencies, but he still will need to show us how he's going to spend the money and how much money he's going to plough into the NHS to realise his ambitious plans.
Ashish, thank you. Now, the man accused of killing 4 students in the US state of Idaho last year appeared in court today and refused to enter a plea. The judge pled not guilty on his behalf. Brian Kohberger is accused of the murders, as our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
Brian Kohberger is the man accused of the student killings that shocked America. He faces murder charges on multiple counts.
Murder in the first degree. Yes. 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 Yes.
He answered 4 times yes to acknowledge the 4 murders he's charged with.
For a prosecuting attorney.
But the judge had to plead not guilty on his behalf after Kohberger declined to plead guilty or otherwise. He is accused of entering this house at King Road in Moscow, Idaho, and in the middle of the night, carrying out quadruple murder. The victims were 3 female flatmates and a partner staying the night. Ethan Chapin and Zana Kernodle were stabbed to death in one bedroom. Lifelong friends Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Morgan were killed in another. Of 2 students left unharmed in the house, one told detectives she stood frozen as a man dressed in black, wearing a mask and with bushy eyebrows, walked past her. Police would take 6 weeks to arrest Brian Kohberger, a criminal justice student at Washington State University.
I'm from Pennsylvania. We actually don't have, crosswalks.
Oh.
This was him a few weeks before the murders. A police officer stopped him for a traffic offence in his white Hyundai. A month after the killings, Kohberger was stopped again, twice for traffic offences, with his father on a road trip home to Pennsylvania.
Hello. How you doing? How y'all doing today?
Police found out he'd changed the registration plates, and a car like his was seen near the site of the murders. 6 weeks after the murders, police made their move. This was their raid on his West Coast apartment. Kohberger was arrested in Pennsylvania and flown back to face the case against him. It includes a DNA match between a knife pouch left at the murder scene and rubbish from bins at his family home. In Idaho, it's case evidence that leaves him looking at the possibility of the death penalty by firing squad. James Matthews, Sky News, Washington.
Russian officials have accused a Ukrainian sabotage group of crossing the border and launching an attack in the region of Belgorod. These images, which haven't been independently verified, were shown on Russian television. Local officials claim 8 people were injured in artillery fire. Well, Kyiv has denied any link to the fighting and blamed it on a revolt by disgruntled Russians. The Metropolitan Police are searching for an 18-year-old man who's seen in videos posted on social media entering a home, apparently without permission. Police say they've identified the person and believe he may have breached a community protection order, which was issued last May in response to videos previously posted online. Junior doctors in England have announced another 72-hour strike next month. Members of the British Medical Association will walk out from the 14th to the 17th of June, describing the 5% pay rise they've been offered as paltry. The government says the announcement is both surprising and deeply disappointing. Here's one of the bravest people you could imagine, a bystander who helped take down a terrorist using a narwhal tusk. Darren Frost's experience of the aftermath of the attack on Fishmongers Hall in London was very similar to that of other atrocities, with a lack of professional help. A report published today highlighted that lack of support, revealing a third of young people caught up in the Manchester Arena attack who needed mental health care didn't get it. Sky's Katerina Vitozzi reports.
It was a brutal, deadly attack that changed lives in an instant. On the night they survived the Manchester Arena attack, these young women were young girls. This memorial in Manchester remembers the 22 that died in an atrocity that traumatised hundreds.
I kept having flashbacks and not being able to do things because of that, not wanting to go out and not listening to music, and just like whole kind of life just kind of switched up a bit.
The thought of being in the city and, you know, all the noises, like the sirens, the loud bangs that you hear, the crowds of people like that really, really scared me.
They all needed mental health support but had different experiences of getting it, especially through NHS services known as CAMS.
I was able to get into CAMS after a really rough road with the GP, and they basically said, like, well, it'll take you 2 years to get into CAMS. It would actually be easier to treat you if you were anorexic or suicidal. So, you know, basically get on with it, and she basically asked us to leave.
Today, a new report has found a third of young people who needed mental health care after the attack simply didn't get it.
Many people in the research said that their parents paid for them to get support in the end because they were waiting far too long on NHS waiting lists. So that's not fair either. This was an attack against the state. It should be the state that steps up and supports them.
The Prince of Wales, who's met with young survivors of the attack, says today's report makes it clear their stories must be heard. But even adults, heroes, have struggled to find help. In 2019, in London, Darren Frost fought off a terrorist with an animal tusk.
I've never been the same again, and I don't know if I ever will, but I'm trying to look at the positives. It has changed me, it made me struggle with memory. I've learned that this is an effect of trauma, and I get confused quite easily by things that I used to find quite simple. The thing with terror is it is horrific when it happens, but it is actually quite uncommon and very rare. The resource required to look after this group of people is relatively small compared to the population.
The government told Sky News it knows there is more to do and is expected to make changes to give better support to survivors of terror. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News, Manchester.
The company behind Facebook faced a record fine today, €1.2 billion, for transferring the data of its users to the United States. It said the penalty imposed by an EU regulator was unjustified, but it's raised again the question of how much data the giant and others hold on all of us, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark reports.
Meta is facing the largest data protection fine ever issued under EU law. GDPR is 5 years old this week, and this will give privacy campaigners something to celebrate. Though Brussels knows Meta will appeal.
We want to bring back legal certainty, clarity with this decision. It's clear, I think also Commissioner Reynders said this before, that we expect it will also be challenged at some point. But the bottom line is we are working on the basis of the safeguards that the courts demanded.
An appeal should buy Meta time to come up with a solution, something to persuade the EU its citizens' data is protected from snooping by the US security agencies, for example. A new data sharing agreement expected this summer should help.
But that isn't expected to solve a very thorny issue for Facebook, which is what to do with about a decade's worth of EU users' data stored on servers in the US. Does it delete the lot? Can it even do that?
It's a logistical challenge that could take years.
I'm not sure of the degree to which Meta would know that
that bucket of data is purely the data of EU users, and that bucket of data is purely the data of Australian users or US users. I think it's a very, very big task for them to try and carry out.
Meta says the decision sets a dangerous precedent for other companies. What's likely is their ensuing legal wrangle over data will make an already complicated situation more so. Take companies operating in the UK, not affected by this EU decision, but using very similar GDPR laws. Smaller firms risk falling foul of the rules, while big companies like Meta can afford the lawyers to stay ahead of the regulators. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Vinicius Jr. is one of the world's top footballers, impressing in the colours of Real Madrid and Brazil. He is also the victim of a hate crime, according to his club, after they reported racial abuse he'd suffered to prosecutors. He said a championship which had once belonged to giants like Lionel Messi now belonged to racists. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
In Spanish football, this is all too familiar. A black player racially abused not by one person, but by a whole section of the crowd. Monkey, they shout. This happened at Valencia. The target, Real Madrid's Brazilian attacker, Vinicius Jr. Afterwards, he released a statement. It wasn't the first time, nor the second, nor the third. Racism is normal in La Liga. The competition thinks it's normal. The federation does too, and the opponents encourage it. I'm so sorry. The championship that once belonged to Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Cristiano and Messi today belongs to racists. His coach, a toughened veteran of European football, seemed shocked.
What happened today has happened many times, but it can't happen anymore. This is unacceptable. The Spanish league has a problem, and it's not Vinicius.
Spanish football has a chronic problem with racism. Look at this. Barcelona's Dani Alves reacting calmly after a banana is thrown at him.
We know of 10 incidents that have been directed at Vinicius this season. Everything from the monkey chants that are quite familiar to an effigy of him hung from a bridge by Atletico Madrid fans.
Brazil's president, furious.
I think it's important that FIFA, the Spanish League and the leagues of other countries take the strongest actions possible, because we can't allow fascism and racism to become part of life at a soccer stadium.
And this won't go away. Real Madrid demanding an inquiry, saying Real Madrid believes that such attacks also constitute a hate crime and has therefore filed the corresponding report with the Attorney General's office, specifically with the Prosecutor's Office against crimes of hatred and discrimination. The FIFA president said he supported Vinicius. He said the game should have been suspended. But the Spanish league president seemed unperturbed, claiming Vinicius should be better informed before criticising the league. Vinicius Jr. ended the game getting a very harsh red card. Abused, angry and emotional. Will Spanish football finally confront its demons? Adam Parsons, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front page of The Eye. The headline, number 10 leaves Braverman waiting on her future. Well, tonight we're joined by the political editors of The Guardian and The Sun, Pepper Crura and Harry Cole. Back in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. The Home Secretary has insisted nothing untoward happened, following reports that she asked civil servants to arrange a private speed awareness course for her. Police investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann are preparing to search a reservoir in Portugal, not far from where she went missing. And the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his plans for the NHS, saying it wouldn't survive another 5 years under the Tories. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political editors of The Guardian and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So, to the Eye, first of all, it says Rishi Sunak has yet to make a decision over whether to launch a formal ethics inquiry over the Home Secretary Suella Braverman's handling of her speeding offence last year. The Guardian carries the findings of an investigation which heard that thousands of hospital staff have reported that they've been sexually abused while at work. The Metro has the renewed search for Madeleine McCann at a Portuguese reservoir near to where she went missing back in 2007. The Sun calls the situation the riddle of the lake. Similarly, here is the Mirror, their headline, Maddie Cops search lake. The Guardian, the Financial Times rather, reports on Facebook's parent company Meta being fined more than £1 billion by the EU's privacy regulator over how it handled users' data. And the Times leading on government plans to cut NHS waiting lists by encouraging patients to use the NHS app to choose treatment in private hospitals. Well, quick reminder, don't forget to scan that QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, and you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. Before we listen and get more from Pippa and Harry, let us bring you some breaking news we're just getting. Sky News understands that Dominic Raab will stand down as an MP at the next election. He, of course, MP for Esher and Walton since 2010. He had recently held the post of Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, forced to stand down over bullying allegations which he disputed. But previously he had been Brexit Secretary and then Foreign Secretary, under which he oversaw and was criticised for the pullout from Afghanistan. So our understanding is that Mr Raab will not stand as an MP at the next general election. Well, let's head to our guest then and get more on that. Harry, I don't suppose this comes as too much of a surprise for people.
No, I don't think so. Look at the local Lib Dems in his patch. It was a tight seat anyway. He only just scraped back a couple of times in the last many elections we've had of late. Obviously, an incredibly disillusioned figure from Deputy Prime Minister to backbencher to now soon to be ex-MP whenever the election comes. I think it was no surprise to people who've seen Dominic Raab of late, spoken to him in the last month. He does feel very poorly treated, I think, by not necessarily the Prime Minister, but certainly left-wing activists, trade unions like the FDA, who did coordinate a lot of complaints that turned out not to have been upheld. He does feel there was a bit of a witch hunt against him. One complaint was upheld, which was a very senior official who had been caught red-handed trying to undermine Brexit negotiations, and it was slightly more complicated than the sort of image of a workplace bully that was allowed to sort of propagate for months and months. So no surprise when you see him throw in the towel, and I suspect he'll didn't fancy another 5 years on the backbenches.
Pippa, a lot of shaking of head there. Explain your position.
Well, I agree with Harry that the Lib Dems were snapping at Dominic Raab's heels. He had a majority of just over 2,000 in 2019 compared to a majority of 23,000 2 years before that. So he looks set to lose the election. He also, in his letter to his constituency chairman, cites the pressure of his job over many years on his young family. He's got two sons, I think, who are just 8 and 10. That is a consideration many politicians share. But I'm afraid his characterisation of the Dominic Raab bullying row, I think, is slightly, shall we say, one-sided. To say it was two complaints were upheld is not the case. One of those complaints was several, in fact, more than several, a number of civil servants, junior ones and senior ones, at the Ministry of Justice. It wasn't the group complaint which wasn't upheld. It was the individual ones. And I think Adam Tolley, because he was the KC that was carrying out the investigation arranged by Rishi Sunak into those allegations over several months, because he came to the conclusion that he wanted to protect the anonymity of the civil servants, because obviously they don't have a public voice, and indeed the witnesses. He left out a lot of detail of the report, but we reported on a lot of these stories, and some of the detail was incredibly harrowing about how he treated civil servants and how he made them feel, including in one case pushing somebody to the brink of suicide, which is a very serious allegation. And another of the complaints which wasn't upheld from his time back in DEXU, when he was briefly Brexit secretary, was only not, basically Tolley didn't come to judgment either way because he said it was so long ago. So I think to say that he's been hard done by and that it was some civil service blob trying to take him down is very much what Dominic Raab and his supporters would like you to say.
I said, yeah, I said he feels hard. Pippa, I said he feels hard done by. Anyone who's spoken to him said this is how he feels. This is him saying he feels badly treated. Yeah.
Okay, and I think some in that group complaint had actually accepted that they hadn't actually had much interaction with him. So, that fed into his,
That was not that complaint, Anna. That was a separate complaint which wasn't upheld.
Gotcha. Anyway, he is one, as we know, of a number of resignations from the Sunak government. He'll be hoping to hold on to Suella Braverman, one imagines. So The Guardian, if we kick off with that, and might as well stay with you, Pippa, on this if you don't mind. The most senior civil servant in the Home Office was made aware of allegations that Suella Braverman wanted to help in dealing with a speeding fine. So explain the significance of that, then.
Right. So, I mean, it's really interesting because this story obviously broke on Saturday afternoon, and the expectation, I think, when people came back to Westminster today was, and of course Rishi Sunak was flying back from Japan, was that he would consult with his ethics advisor, Laurie Magnus, and that he would probably ask him to investigate these claims. And of course, that hasn't happened today. I think, casting back to Dominic Raab, Rishi Sunak took a couple of days there as well. Number 10 suggests that he wants to follow due process. He wants to be seen to be doing things the right way. So he's obviously taking time to find out himself what the facts were before he asks Laurie Magnus to investigate, if indeed he does do that. So this story in The Guardian is a suggestion that the civil servant who was asked by Suella Braverman to arrange, according to the claims, to arrange a bespoke driving awareness course, was understood that it was potentially a breach of the code, that certainly it shouldn't be something that they should be asked to do, and reported that up to Matthew Rycroft, who's the Permanent Secretary, the most senior official in the department. And what it does, I think, is raise the question about whether other senior officials or indeed other senior politicians knew about these allegations, which of course all happened back in September, even though they only just came out now. So it's question marks about who knew what and when. I guess while we wait to see what Rishi Sunak decides to do in terms of an ethics investigation into the allegations.
Yes, and that idea of waiting, again, makes the front page of the Eye, Harry, does it not? I know Jacob Rees-Mogg was suggesting that, celebrities can have private speeding hearings or, the lesson rather than taking the 3 points. If she'd asked anybody else, would it have been all right for her to ask, or was it just plain wrong on every level?
No, that's what the number of this comes down to. She's phoned up a lawyer and said, "Can you organise me a private meeting?" Mr. Loophole, one of the sort of lawyers, one of the sort of driving lawyers, has come out and publicly said he's organised loads of VIP one-on-one meetings. There's a question of whether it's a bad look that the Home Secretary didn't want to sort of mingle with the public, so to speak. But then her defenders are saying we've got to take into security concerns. So when she did raise in the office, and no one's denying that she did raise it in the office and say, look, how could I do this? Is there a chance I can do this one-on-one? It looks like the civil service, it went into the civil service machine. I think it reached all as far as the Cabinet Office before it came back and said, actually, no, this isn't really something the civil service can help you with. Now, the question, the nub of this issue is did her asking her private office for advice constitute a breach of the ministerial code? Now, that's what I think the delay in the ethics advisor and the Prime Minister is coming down to, is that a breach that is worthy of an investigation? If it is a breach, was she just, sort of looking at her different options. Ultimately, she didn't do this. So I suspect it feels like the longer this goes on, there felt a sort of change in mood tonight. That actually it feels like perhaps Rishi Sunak, we saw him in the Commons, Suella Braverman kind of supportively on the back when he arrived in the Commons. Is he actually thinking that perhaps this has been a little bit overblown? He wants to see the paper trail. He wants to know if things were done in the right way. And actually, maybe there won't be the investigation that the opposition are clamouring for. And actually, you know, because nothing actually came of it, whether this really is a breach. So I suspect we'll know very early tomorrow morning.
Yes, I've done nothing untoward. Doesn't mean I didn't try to do something untoward. I suppose her critics would argue.
But also, is it untoward, though, I think is the question. I think, you know, is it untoward to say, actually, is there a way as the Home Secretary with my security detail that I can go to a meeting one-on-one? It's whether you know, no one's suggesting that she tried to avoid paying the fine or doing the course. You know, if she'd be trying to get out the course and pay the fine, obviously that's untoward. But I haven't seen any evidence yet of anyone actually suggesting that she tried to avoid some form of punishment, which is either the course or the points.
Go for it, Pippa. Honestly, I can see you're itching. Go.
No, it's obviously not. Harry's absolutely right. It's not suggesting that she was trying to avoid it. But the point is, the ministerial code is quite clear about either apparent or actual conflicts, and that ministers need to keep their public duties apart from their private lives. So that means that ministers can't, for example, ask their civil servants to arrange their Tesco shopping to be delivered or their kids to be picked up from school, or indeed to sort out arrange a speeding awareness course. And I think what it comes down to is, did she ask them for advice, or did she direct them, as some of the claims suggest, did she direct them to actually arrange that course? And I suspect that's what will come down to ultimately. But regardless, it does feel like on the lesser end, the lower end, if you like, of potential breaches. And under the new rules, it's not just a case of a sort of a binary case of either a minister's found guilty and they're sacked, or they're not found guilty and they stay in post. There's a range of sanctions available to the Prime Minister, including things like a public apology or docking a bit of their ministerial salary. And it feels likely that if this investigation goes forward, and there's lots of ifs here, I understand that, she's found to have breached the code, that we wouldn't necessarily, even in that case, expect her to go.
Yes, indeed. Well, actually, the Eye, in its few paragraphs on its front page, says that Braverman is picking fights and looking for an excuse to get sacked as new party divisions break into the open. The kind of suggestion was that that's what happened last time she resigned, Harry.
Well, that was a crazy time for everyone, which, if anyone wants to know exactly what happened there, they should buy my book. I've got to get a plug in there.
It was the Liz Truss era, people.
It's clearly a controversial figure, you know, but I don't think actually if you think why Rishi Sunak brought her back just 10 days after she was sacked by Liz Truss, her coming over to Rishi Sunak and pulling out the race and saying it's got to be Rishi basically killed Boris Johnson's hopes of a comeback last October stone dead. So, you know, she is a powerful figure on the right. She is a leadership contender. She was almost certainly going to be one of the, if the Tories lose the election, one of the major candidates to be the leader of the opposition. So, you know, politically, it's a headache for Sunak as well. She may be itching for a fight, but I'm not saying she's unsackable. And if I do say that, she'll probably get fired tomorrow. But, you know, you've got to look at where Sunak is. He is not in a great position at the moment. Yes, he's got the sort of party rump of MPs and ministers behind him, but the right wing of the party are cross. They are agitating. They want more vision. They want tax cuts. They want something done about migration, all building up to Thursday when there's going to be this great crescendo of the government's failure on immigration and all the promises laid bare before everyone's eyes. Rishi Sunak isn't going to want to take that by himself. He's going to want Suella Braverman there as a bit of a human shield to keep the right wing of his party happy. So she's in a much stronger position than people on Twitter would have you believe.
Well, I mean, you say a failure of government policy, but are we actually being able to send our pigs to the abattoir because we brought in abattoir workers, and actually staff our care homes because they brought in care home workers? So that's what people will be analysing on Thursday when they see the migration workers and the sort of skilled workers who've come in on that. I'm just going to revert to the Daily Telegraph, Pippa. On the front page, they've got the Raab story there. They say the Daily Telegraph has seen an exchange of letters between the former Deputy Prime Minister and the chairman of his local Conservative association explaining his decision. Mr Raab wrote the letter dated last last Friday, I have become increasingly concerned over the last few years about the pressure the job has placed on my young family. His sons Peter and Joshua, as you said, aged 10 and 8 respectively, points you've already made. But the Telegraph has that story on its front page. Anyway, lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including Sir Keir Starmer outlining Labour's plans for the NHS. Do they stack up? More on that in just a moment.
Independent, United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life. People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole from The Guardian and The Sun. Welcome back to both of you. So big day in terms of NHS and Labour, Pippa. My NHS reforms will cut the biggest killers within a decade. He's talking about heart disease, cancer, suicide as well. But some big pledges, don't know what money he's talking about, and some very familiar-looking targets, which were very Blairite, I thought, listening to them.
Well, they weren't just Blairite, they're Tory targets. I mean, there's a series of 5 targets about ranging from things like A&E waiting times to ambulance waits to cancer referrals, which have been proposed by the government. and which Labour has said that they would deliver in the first 5 years of a Labour government, prompting some sort of scepticism as to whether they're actually deliverable. But I think that scepticism really just goes far to show what sort of lack of faith people have in government running the NHS at the moment, given it's really been on in many cases, it's on its knees. And I should caveat that with the fact that hospitals, GPs and other NHS providers offer an incredible service despite the pressures that they face on workforce and other issues. But yes, this is one of Keir Starmer's 5 missions, which he is setting out. We've already had, let me get this right, crime, the economy, and education. And I think we've got climate still to come. Health is obviously a big one. NHS is often at the top of the list of voters' concerns coming up to an election. And this is not a sort of a policy. This is not their policy proposals in their entirety on the NHS. This is supposed to be sort of like the work underpinning what will then be set out at the autumn conference, then ahead of an election in a manifesto next year. But what Keir Starmer was unable to do today in any of the broadcast interviews that he did this morning, and indeed in the questions after this event that you're picturing there, was to set out explicitly how some of these changes would be funded. And I think the closest we got to it was him acknowledging in an interview beforehand that him signalling that that Labour government would put more funding into the NHS in England. They've talked a lot about wanting to reform it, but they have acknowledged, and he said, that yes, he put he was asked about where he put his money where his mouth is on this, and he said yes, money is part of the answer, and the NHS is always better funded under Labour. So that was a step forward from where we've been before, in that he's at least saying, he's acknowledging that it will require some cash. What he's not yet doing is setting out in its entirety where that money would come from. There's a few specific examples, like more doctors and nurses paid for by scrapping the non-dom tax and so on. But I think there will be an expectation from the electorate that he does set out more detail. They say they're going to do that. Let's see. But it's so key to voter trust in whether future governments are likely to be able to deliver on some of the policies like we saw today.
Yeah, OK, very interesting. Quick 30 seconds, Financial Times, talking about Meta. We finally found out what GDPR does, apart from make us go accept all cookies endlessly. Harry?
Yeah, a pretty hefty, whacking great fine there, which I think, I'm one of the people that gives the EU its fair amount of stick over the years. But, this is clearly something globally that lots of people are incredibly concerned about. Our online safety bill in the UK is, somewhere bouncing around, I think, in the House of Commons, House of Lords at the moment. Clampdowns on sort of the tech giants are coming, and this is where the EU can use its heft. That Meta, probably one of the most famous and biggest companies in the world, has hit a wall here. I suspect there'll be loads of legal wranglings around it, but it's certainly a good sign of a show of intention that these companies cannot be bigger than countries and bigger than governments, and need to be brought to heel from time to time. So yeah, good on them.
OK, Harry, Pippa, thank you both very much indeed. Obviously, lots of coverage too of Madeleine McCann. Talk about that in the 11 o'clock when you're back. Right now, let's check out the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the country remaining under the influence of high pressure through the rest of the week and across the spring bank holiday weekend. This will bring quiet conditions with spells of warm sunshine for many. Any remaining cloud over southern and southeastern England will clear to give a bright or sunny start for the bulk of the country. Cloud will increase over Scotland and Northern Ireland, some patchy light rain or drizzle around. It will be a dry morning, though, elsewhere, with sunny spells. Fair weather cloud bubbling up may give an isolated shower for Wales and for central England. Cooler than yesterday. Temperatures widely reaching the late teens or a high of 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.